Hi, Dr. Miller.
Hello, Meredith.
How are you?
I am doing all right. How are you?
I am good. I am good. I am so grateful you're here. I shared and overshared this event with everyone because I was so excited. So I know we had booked the podcast a while back, and I thought it would be great for everyone to be able to see you. So much gratitude for you for being here. Yeah. So I thought it would be interesting to start today by talking about how when I was a teenager, I had a tremendous fear of death. And I read a lot of Sylvia Plath, and I wore, black combat boots, and I loved her Lady Lazarus poem, like I eat men with air, I have this red hair, and I dyed my hair red. And but like when I had to go to a funeral or I had to be presented with the idea of dying or death, I was very like terrified of it. And like a lot of people are, of course. But 4 years ago, I was about 12 weeks sober. So I'm 4 years sober now, but I just quit drinking. And I get a call from my mom that my grandmother had taken a fall and she was in the hospital. And the message was basically, come now. And my mom and I were with my grandmother as she exited life. And I owe so much gratitude to her for giving me that gift. And I know that sounds so weird, but I learned so much sitting with her at the end of her life. And I was so grateful for that moment. And my mom, she mentions it too. And so then I saw your TED Talk, and I've been following you, and I've read your book, and I thought, this is just something that no one talks about, not enough. And so I'm just honored that you're here, and I have lots of notes. I don't usually take this many notes. I like to free flow, but I did lots of notes, and so I'm over prepared. So I may be off because I'm over prepared. So, but thank you again. Thank you again. So let's start quickly with your story. And I know you've told it a million times, but just so people kind of know where you came from and why you decided to become a doctor.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thank you. I really, it's so important that on this big subject, it stays abstract unless people are willing to get a little personal. So I really appreciate you sharing your story a little bit there about your time with your grandmother and your own feelings about the whole subject. So thank you.
Thank you.
So for me, when I was a sophomore in college, screwing around, this was 1990, fall of 1990. I had just gotten back from Thanksgiving break, and friends and I were just horsing around, and we climbed up on top of a park commuter train that runs on campus. It was just sitting there. It was after hours. We climbed it like you climb a tree. And I had a metal watch on, and this is New Jersey, and the power lines run overhead above the train. Excuse me. And so when I got up on top of the train and stood up, I had a metal watch on, and the electricity arced to the watch. And that was it. So I got electrical burns, lost my arm below the elbow where the watch was, and then both legs below the knee. And that was it. It was just basically a fluke freak kind of accident. But I was 19 at the time, and it was gosh, we could talk about this for hours. There were all sorts of things that flowed from that experience. But
Right.
Bottom line for our conversation here, what it really did, among other things for me, is it really woke me up to my own mortality. And it really woke me up to just how connected we are, and how mutable and changeable we are, and how hard that can be, but also how beautiful that can be. So anyway, there's much to say, but that was my entree that took me into medicine and took me into this kind of work.
Yeah, because you were so close to death.
Yeah, that was a big piece of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that happened to you, and you walked around and said, oh, why me? Why did this happen to me? You became a total victim, right? No, I mean,
There were
how
moments.
was that easy? I mean, what was your mindset like? I mean,
Well,
that's not the first go-to.
No, I mean, it was, there were, it took years, right? I mean, and it's not linear. Some days I was just a basket case and filled with self-pity. And the next day I, for whatever reason, was feeling sort of strong and in good humor and helping other people around me be comfortable. I don't know. It was just all over the place, but you could feel there was grief to it, kind of coming to terms with what I had lost. But thanks to a lot of support that I had, it wasn't all that hard, really. In retrospect, at the time, it was brutal. But in looking back, there was a sweet arc to sort of grieving what I was losing, and then becoming aware of all that I still had. And the
Yeah.
two go together very nicely. And I needed to be sad. I needed to miss the things I was losing. That was an important piece of it. I didn't just jump right to some sort of levity and, oh, I got this. I needed to roll around in the dirt. I needed to be lost. And I was for a while, but I had a lot of support around me, people helping me see the shore. And
Yeah.
within a couple of years, I was much more aware of all that I still had versus what I had lost.
Yeah, yeah. In your book, so everyone, the book is a beginner's guide to the end. When you talk about your story, I wrote down this quote that you wrote: "I needed people to see that I wasn't afraid, so that I wouldn't be. I learned not to constantly compare my new body to my old body or
Mhm.
to other people's. Instead, I could engage," and I love this, "in the creative process of making my way through the day. I
Mhm.
got close enough to see something of death and come back from the ledge only to realize that it's in and around us all the time. And now I see this truth in my patients looking to change and be themselves all at once." And so I thought that was so beautiful, because the creative process of making your way through the day, I'm sure it truly did become a creative process.
It did. It did. And it became a creative process, but it's probably more true to say, Meredith, that it was revealed as always having been a creative process. It's like what this experience, of course, changed the architecture of my body, but that was actually a bit player in all this. What it really did was tweak how I saw myself in the world, and how I saw the world in general, and how I became aware of change and inevitability of change. And in other words, I was still looking at very much the same world in a lot of ways. I was just now looking at it differently, or with a bigger lens.
Right.
And so I do feel that all of us, any of us, is engaged in a creative act, just making our way through day. That it's filled with improvisation and all sorts of things we didn't plan for. We don't we don't give ourselves a credit of being creative for making our way through the day, but I just think it just genuinely is for all of us,
Yeah.
anybody.
That's such a great way to look at it. It takes a lot of pressure off too. It's instead
Yeah.
of having this perfectionistic tendency, it's like, well, how can I be creative today and not make
Yeah.
a total mess? Yeah.
Yeah, it's like an agility that comes with this. Like, once you realize once the ground's pulled out from underneath you, you find your balance internally, in some ways. You find some balance through agility, because things are moving all the time. And what you wake up to is, whether you're amputated or not, the ground is moving underneath you all the time. I mean, it seems like what's going on with us right now in the world with COVID is exposing. We may have thought the ground was solid underneath us, but that's only ever been temporary or an illusion, at best. And it's just being revealed as shifty.
Yeah.
It's always been so, I think, if you ask me.
Yeah. That's a really good point. Another part in your book that really struck me, and I think it's in the first chapter, is you wrote, "There's nothing wrong with you for dying."
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, is that part of our thought process? Like, oh, I'm sorry I'm dying. I'm sorry that this is happening to you through
Mhm.
me. And I thought that
Mhm.
was such an interesting start, because like we don't talk about it. We don't talk about our plans for end of life. I'm a recovering attorney as well, so I did a lot of estate work. I worked in a teeny tiny town, and
Mhm.
worked with an aging population, and we did a lot of estate work. And so but no one talked about it. They didn't talk about it until it was late, or the planning needed to have been done 10 years ago. And so I do encourage anyone to get Dr. Miller's book, A Beginner's Guide to the End. It was so comprehensive and so fantastic. But the one thing that really stuck out to me is, you said only 10 to 20% of us die without some kind of warning.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, sorry, did I just cut you off, Meredith? Were you
No,
about
no,
to
no,
say
go
something?
ahead.
No.
No.
Well, yeah, a couple of thoughts to tie in those two statements. Yeah, I think it is really important. I think it's the first sentence of the book, that there's nothing wrong with you for dying, because right? We don't talk about it much. And when we do, it tends to be with pretty frightful terminology filled with warring analogies. We're going to go to battle and all this stuff. And, hey, if that language suits you, fine. But very often, because there's not a more robust and fuller conversation, we just have this sort of gnarly battle mentality. And it's a war that we all know we're going to lose. And so when our language, even if we don't feel like anything's wrong with us for dying, the world sort of seems to be telling us that there is. Like,
Right.
we had negative thoughts, or we didn't eat enough vegetables, or we should have jogged more, or whatever it is. The implications of how we do talk about it suggest that you're a loser for dying. And
Right.
that
Right. You didn't
sucks.
fight hard enough. Shame
Right.
on
You
you.
succumbed to illness or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to escape the sort of vibe around that language. And that's why I think it's so important to normalize this right out of the chutes and try to get the shame out of the picture. Of course, there's sorrow, sadness, there's all sorts of stuff, but we don't need to add shame to the mix. We don't need to feel bad for feeling bad. Is the way I feel about it. So anyway, that's one. I think there's a lot to say about that, and why a book like this seems to be important, because while this is a fundamental, essential part of being human, we've sort of lost touch with it. It's how necessary it is. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah. It's just
that's
not a conversation we have. And I started reading a lot of Stoicism in the last year. And one of the big tenets of Stoicism is like, you're going to die.
yeah,
Hello,
yep,
accept it. And I thought the first time I listened to Ryan Holiday on a podcast and he was talking, it's like memento mori, I think is the Latin term. I
yeah,
thought, oh, I don't like this. I don't like this conversation. I don't like this thought of
yeah.
mortality. But the more I think about it, when you step into, yeah, we're gonna die, and that's part of living. And
Mhm.
because I know I'm gonna die one day, how can I be present today? How can I be kinder? And I know we were supposed to talk on the podcast last month, and my daughter wasn't feeling well because she was pre-appendicitis, and I just texted
Mhm.
you and I said, hey, I know this is a dumb thing and maybe we'll never reschedule it, but I gotta be with my girl today. And you texted me back and you were like, hey, you're doing the right thing. And I'm like, I
Yeah,
figured you would understand that of all the
yeah,
of all the guests. Yeah. But with that in mind, that we are all going to experience this at some point, one of the things that you really focus on is for us to be mindful of our goals of care toward
yeah,
the end. And I think this is a really important thing to discuss. So if you'd like
yeah,
to touch on that.
yeah. It is. So goals of care is a phrase that you might hear in medicine more and more. It's sort of it's not my phrase. In other words, there is a thing, especially in palliative medicine, we refer to our goals of care. It's sort of it's a way to contextualize your life, so that you can make good decisions for yourself. So it comes up in healthcare a lot around treatment decisions. Invariably, like you had indicated a minute ago, Meredith, most of us are going to die from chronic illness. In other words, we're going to be given a diagnosis months or years in advance of it killing us. So we're going to have some sense of how we'll die well in advance. And so another reason why it makes sense to forge some sort of relationship with your own death, because you're going to the idea, like back in the day, the idea, like I meet a lot of people who really believe that the death that's coming for them is, they're basically going to be great, and then they're going to go to sleep and never wake up. Or they're going to, I hear this a lot, they're going to drop dead on the tennis court, like doing what they love. They're going to be totally alive and then totally dead. That
Right.
doesn't really usually go that way. So it begs hence the need to have some sort of relationship with this thing that you got to live with, this illness, this chronic unfixable thing you got to live with. So I think why that's so important is that's the bulk of us are going to have some experience with chronic illness. So given that, chronic illness just means it's something you can't fix. It doesn't go away. You got to live with it. So how to live with it becomes the question. How do you accommodate illness? How do you accommodate death in your life so that these events don't feel like these foreign invaders robbing you of life? They're part of you. So goals of care is a way to make sense of your situation, to bring it back to what's important to you now, so that you can make good decisions for yourself. the norm in healthcare and medicine is, it used to be that there weren't that many things to try. And I think back in the day, it made sense to just say, well, I'll try anything the doctor offers. And, because it's 2 or 3 things. And when those stop working, then I'll accept death, and then I'll put my affairs in order. And it's, that may have made sense at one point, if it ever did. But now there's no shortage of things that your doctor can try. So if you're waiting for that list to run out before you dare to accept that you're going to die, don't do that, because you're not going to run out of things to try. And at some point, actually, you're going to be offered things to try that probably won't serve you.
Right.
And so you have to be much more active in your care. So how do you assert yourself in all this process? Well, you assert yourself by becoming known to your doctor. And, so for me, BJ, what might be important for me is, when it comes time, I don't mind hospitals, but I know I really don't want to die in a hospital. I know I want to be around friends and family. I know I want to be comfortable. So those goals become important around which to make decisions. I know if that's my goal, then I'm probably not going to try that last ditch treatment that's going to have me in the hospital. I know I'm probably not going to choose to be on a ventilator when I'm dealing with multiple chronic illnesses and things like that. So by asserting who you are, you, Meredith, not generic person X, what you care about, if you put that into the mix, it has a way of organizing decisions that need to be made. Because if you don't do that, you'll fall down these default pathways in medicine. And the default pathways tend to be more gear, more stuff, intubation, more machines. And we can prop up a body practically indefinitely. So you have to actively say no to that if that's not what you want. Does that
Right.
make
And
sense?
also, yeah, it totally does. And when I listened to your TED Talk, you had mentioned you had a chronic patient. I guess she had ALS, and she wanted to start smoking at the end. And I
Oh, yeah.
thought, and that was, so I was, of course, when I was reading Sylvia Plath, I was smoking cigarettes and all that. So, but I quit smoking years ago. And I've always said, if I have a good life, around 85, I'm going to start drinking and smoking again, and I thought about that, when I was reading your book. Yeah, at the end of life, like, how do you want to be? You want to feel the smoke in your lungs because you don't know how much longer you have with that. And that's such a foreign concept for us to think about that long term,
Yeah.
what we would want. But what a gift death can be if you think about it along the way. And how many people are totally uncomfortable? Like, show of hands, talking about this. Are people like, oh no, anyone? No, y'all are all so very, very forward thinking because you're my friends. No, but yeah, I love that. And one of the things that you talk about too is the healthcare system was designed, and I have a bunch of friends in medicine who say this too. The healthcare system was designed with diseases, not people, at its core,
Yeah.
and that we ask too much of our hospitals and our healthcare.
Yeah. I mean, medicine, I love medicine. It saved my life. I love being a doctor, blah, blah, blah. But it can't done that is, and nothing's impossible. And where I did my internship in Milwaukee at the Medical College of Wisconsin, the Freighter Hospital was one of the main hospitals we rotated through. Their tagline was, where miracles happen every day. And I hated that. I mean, I hated walking into that building. I'm not a miracle worker. I can apply some science, but miracle's it's not my station. And that kind of expectation that we can do anything, is just, I get why. I understand there's enough truth to it. And I also understand the seduction of hope that goes with it. But we kick the can down the road and we defer the inevitable moment where actually there's certain things we can't do, and we just keep kicking that down the road, and then we end up extending our pain and complicating our pain. So, but now I've forgotten, Meredith, did you ask a question? Was I?
Probably not. I usually just talk and then go, yes. No, but the thought I was having was, life, kind of the Tony Robbins concept of life is happening for us, not to us. And if we wait the long, stretch that, everyone's going to be healed, and we don't accept that life is happening for us, that we have some control over, our wishes in the end, we can, do certain things. I mean, then it's happening to us, and it becomes this rapid panic. And toward the end, nothing is taken care of. Your life's a mess. Your house is a mess. Your children are fighting. And one of the amazing things in the book, and here's me not having a question again, but one of the things in the book that you talk about is ways to manage this toward the end, or even now. Like, I'm 40. I'm a former lawyer who doesn't have a will in the state of Massachusetts. Things like that. And I'm reading your book. I'm like, I know, BJ, I know, I gotta get my will. I know better than this. But part of accepting that we're going to die, and especially when we have an illness, is getting your affairs in order. And one of your main points was don't leave a mess. And I loved that chapter. So how about that? Dr. Miller, will you please talk about don't leave a mess?
Yeah. Well, and I'm going to also link us back to some, first of all, let me just also get this a little bit clearer too. Like, yes, death is a part of life. And that is a central theme here. That is, if we're interested in culture change in this country, I think this is one of the reveals that you can tell the US is not a very old country, not a very developed society per se, because of our attitude toward aging and death. We treat it as this optional thing that happens if we don't try hard enough, or something, this piece of nature that we can push back on. And I think what's waiting for us as a culture is, if we dare to see death as part of life, not as the antithesis of life, then we'll stop being at war with ourselves, with our nature. And you don't have to love death. It's just, do you love life? And if you love life, death's a piece of it. I mean, that's the basic. I'm not here to suggest that you need to just squeal with death and giggle with it and skip down this. I mean, that if you do, great. I'm just saying, you just have to, it just is. You can put an adjective to it if you want, but it just is. So that's why I think we need to deal with it. And what's happily waiting for us on the other side of that daring move of dealing with mortality is, you start seeing what it does for you, and it does teach you things. And chief among those things is, I think it proves the point that life is precious. I mean, for me, this phrase, like, what makes anything precious but that it ends? How would you feel about life's specialness if it just went on indefinitely? I mean, we have movies and books devoted to that. It looks like vampires and zombies. It's like it's not a happy state. Right. And so anyway, that's just sort of backdrop of ways to kind of get into the arena with the subject, so that you can relate to it and deal with it, so that you can get around to these practical things too. Like, at some point, a well-lived life, at some point, I see this with patients all the time, and in myself too. If you really want to die at some amount of peace, you've got to begin somewhere along the way to see the power of life beyond yourself. That your ego, yourself is an amazing thing. It's important, but don't confuse yourself with everything. In other words, if you start investing yourself, if you start injecting your love or seeing yourself outside of yourself, because yourself is going to die. That's the part we know. The ego is going to die, but life's going to go on. There's life beyond yourself, and you can feel part of that. I mean, I encourage you to think about that. That's another reason to ruminate on this. You'll start to feel part of things beside yourself. And so as your self withers, you're expanding into a universe around you, and you can start thinking about life beyond your own life, like a legacy. Like, what do you leave behind? What effect, what residue do you leave behind? What pile of mess do you leave behind? What beauty do you leave behind? This can be a really organizing question for yourself as you move through life, and especially as you get towards the end. Because if you want to, I think that's the key to immortality, is actually seeing life outside of yourself and investing yourself in life outside yourself. And one of the kindest things any of us can do for our loved ones is to not leave a mess. To do your darn will, do your advance directives, so your friends and family aren't left guessing what you'd want. So they can just be acting on your behalf lovingly and know that they're doing what you want them to do rather than guessing. Dealing with your stuff, so that your loved one's grieving process isn't soaked up by endless estate sales and paperwork and all sorts of craziness. So there can be like a spiritual, almost a cleansing to cleaning your emotional life up and your attic out, so that when you die, you leave a pretty sweet, clean sorrow, not not layered with shellacked with guilt and regret and second doubt and recrimination, etc. Does that
Yeah,
make
yeah.
sense?
It does. It does. And my husband said for a long time when we first got married, he's like, when I die, I want to have a Viking funeral. I want to be pushed out into the water and burned. And I was like, you're gonna have to put that one in a will because that that's not gonna happen if I'm in charge. But yeah, like to if anyone that's lost someone and you have to go clean up,
Mm,
you know what that is. And but it is a sort of presence. It kind of all goes back to that presence. If we accept that we're going to have to die one day, then we need to be present and clean up our mess,
mhm,
and decide, is this important, is
mm.
this pile of junk important to me, and then you have to kind of go down that path of asking yourself, what is important to me, what matters, who am I?
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, and it's a constant. It's a question you don't ask once or twice. It's, it's a constant. You're constantly trimming your sails. I mean, I always love this with when I work with patients and families. You can often feel people being kind of by a diagnosis and the effects of treatments and stuff can kind of be pulling people down roads that they don't want to be on. The sense of self goes away. Their identity is all screwed up and messed up. And oftentimes, we love conviction. I love meeting someone who knows who they are and they're stand strong and they're that way no matter what. There's something very charming about that. But you know what? I'm also especially moved by people who have roped in a change into their makeup, that they aren't static, that they are affected by life. That's one of my new favorite words in the last year is affected. I want, like, affect means mood. To affect means to obviously to change something, to alter something, to invest yourself in something. And what an honor it is to be affected. If I'm having a conversation with you, Meredith, and I'm affected by that, I mean, what a beautiful exchange that is. There's something very moving about being moved. And that means not being static. So as you deal with the threats to your identity that illness can superimpose on you, if you can find a way to dance with that and move with that and be affected, that I think is a very adaptive response, and it takes you down very beautiful pathways, and illness can lead you to see things that you never would have seen before if you go with it this way.
Right.
So I don't know why I launched down that pathway, but I do think there's something really, really beautiful to being changed, to being affected. I wanted to say
Yeah.
that, but now I can't remember why.
Well, I mean, it's just
Why I
the
said that.
human, it's the human condition when we make connections with people, when people are showing us their true selves, how they really feel, and someone that can say, "Hey, this is impacting, this is affecting me."
Yeah,
That allows us to say, you know what, this is impacting me too, and here's how I feel. I mean, if you're the one dying and you give people permission to feel a certain, however they feel about it, and
yeah,
because you're able to feel, it's just the whole connection that we
yeah.
make.
Yes, in an exchange, like
An
we're
exchange, yeah.
we're affecting each other. Life is changing because we're changing, and vice versa. And that's such a dynamic thing. And it also makes the point that, yeah, we're one person. You or I is just one person, right? You could say we're just a drop in the ocean, blah blah blah. But it wouldn't be the same ocean without your little drop. There's something
Right.
really right sizing about this. Like, yes, I'm teeny, and I'm potent. Yes, I'm yes, I'm itty bitty, but the world would be different without me.
We're like
And
vanilla extract. You
well,
need it.
yeah, well, hell yeah. No, I love vanilla, by the way. That's such an exotic bean. I always laugh when people think vanilla is like bland. But anyway, yeah, there's something about being in the flow of life. And I guess that's another point I wanted to kind of make here is if you like have these conversations, Meredith, and you roll around with this in a daily way, routinely, those changes that we're describing are also little deaths. Like you can practice your dying a little bit, like your identity shifts. Like I felt one way last week, but that way died in a way. Now I feel this way. And if you can kind of roll with change, in a way you're rolling with death. You are practicing loss all the time. You're trimming your sails all the time, and you're seeing loss and gain in the same equation all day, every day. You walk down the street, you see death happening by the bugs you step on, or the leaf you see falling from the tree, or whatever it is. It's just all around you and in you, and it doesn't feel like this exotic, foreign, invading force. And therefore, when it does come your time, you've been rehearsing this in a way, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to put your little blue Zoom hand up. You can do it by going to, I think, manage participants, and you can raise your hand and I'll call on you and you can ask a question, or feel free to type it in the chat. This is a great opportunity, you guys, so take advantage of it and practice your public speaking skills.
Yeah.
I think one thing that we could segue from this is legacy, the concept of legacy. You know, it's like a cringe word. What is my legacy? Because I'm so important. But there is an idea that, you know, what are we going to leave? And I think your book does an excellent job kind of putting legacy in perspective. And then at the end of the chapter on it, you mentioned something like, no matter if you didn't write a book or you didn't write anything down or send a letter, you were still here, you still matter. And so maybe we can talk about the concept of what we leave behind, or legacy, and what can we do about that in this moment.
Yeah. Well, any questions? Yeah, you just tell me when there's a question.
Yeah, I will.
Okay. But yeah, I think
Oh,
that's
wait, there's a question.
okay.
Shall we talk? Let's take a question. Why not? All right. Jay Bennett, you are unmuted, I think.
Good morning, and thank you so much for your time. My question goes back to what you, Meredith, you had said, you know, when I get older, I'm going to smoke again, or that patient did.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking about something happening with my grandfather, who's in assisted living now. And my mother and her sister are arguing about the types of food he should eat and how many pieces of sausage he should have for breakfast. And is there a tactful way to address that, I guess? Because I kind of wanted to say, you know, when your dog gets old, you let him eat all the cheeseburgers he wants.
Mm-hmm.
How can I say that in a more tactful and loving way?
And I'm sorry, did you say this was your father or your grandfather?
It's my grandfather. And so it's my mother and her sister that are arguing about it. And, you know, I understand where they're coming from. One of them wants to hold on as long as possible, and the others kind of has my mindset. But I'm just looking for a loving way to say that.
Well, you just named something really, really important, which is oftentimes what you'll see in families around someone who's doing the dying is, you know, family dynamics come out here. And what you might be experiencing in your mother and her sister is their own grief. So you sort of intimated as much. I think it's an important lens so that you know how to hear each other well, because sometimes it can get pretty intense around the bedside, and families can sometimes sort of get at each other rather than come together. And I guess I just named that as grief will come out in all sorts of ways. So maybe you're so wise to have compassion for your mother and her sister as they deal with the impending death of their father. Rather than chasing their argument around, just seeing it as their suffering. So I don't know if that's even true in this case, but I just need it as a generic comment so we know how to read the signals at the bedside and not get too swept up. So anyway, that's one point. The second point would be, you know, is your grandfather is he communicative at this point?
Oh yes, very much so. And I think he just stops talking because the two of them are talking so much. That he just sort of sits back and accepts whoever wins that argument. In
a loving way?
And he loves, absolutely. Oh yeah, he loves them both very much. He still calls all of us pumpkin.
Sweet.
So yeah, I mean, everybody's coming from a loving place. I think my motivation is probably trying to ease that tension.
Yeah. Well, so ideally, if your grandfather, you know, ideally, it gets back to what Meredith had brought up, the sort of goals of care. And if your grandfather is able to say, hey guys, you know what, I've been thinking about this, and these are my final days, who knows how long I have, but you know, as I look at, this is my life now, and I realize here's what's important to me. You know what, when it comes down to it, I'd really just love to watch the 49ers or the Cubs or whatever and eat as much sausage as I want, you know, or whatever it is. I mean, you know, ideally it'd be coming from your grandfather, because he's the boss here. And if he says, here's what's important to me and here's what's not so important to me now, then you've got your marching orders, and then everyone can show their devotion by honoring his wishes. So ideally, he's the one making these kinds of statements and giving us direction. Do you think that's a possible, could you imagine a conversation where with enough questioning, he might answer it and say, well, gosh, now that you asked me what's so important to me now, here's my answer. Would he answer that question?
Absolutely. Now that you say that, it would be really easy just to grab his hand and say, Grandpa, what do you want?
Yeah.
I think he just hasn't been asked. So I bet he would answer that question. That's a great, great suggestion.
Well, and it may sometimes, and sometimes it really is kind of that easy. It's amazing just simply just asking. And I'll just say one more thing, in that conversation, it can be very helpful to contextualize it. So, hey, Grandpa, what's important to you? That you maybe get an answer, but you say, if there's a way to be talking about his health, and if the doctor has sort of let him know, if there's a prognosis moment or if there's a treatment decision moment, those can be really poignant times to sort of circle the wagon, sit down and have a big conversation, say, here's a couple decisions now, we got to think these things through. Grandpa, how do you want to approach this? What's important now? How do you want to make this decision? So in other words, contextualizing the conversation can be very helpful and lead just very naturally into the answers that I think you're looking for. But it sounds like you guys will find your way. Is there anything more you want to talk about that situation though?
No, thank you. That was fantastic recommendations. I really appreciate it.
That's my pleasure. Yeah, my best to your family.
Awesome. Okay. Ashley, I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead. Maybe I should actually unmute you. Why is it not working? All right, hold on. Let me try Lorraine, see if I can unmute you. Okay, Lorraine, I think you're unmuted.
I am.
Okay.
I really appreciate this conversation. When my father passed, I had a very powerful moment where both of us acknowledged that he was dying rather than ignoring that. Could you comment on that? The importance of acknowledging the fact that someone is dying to them.
Well, Lorraine, yeah, thank you. And did you say that that was acknowledged? Is that how it played out, or was his death not acknowledged? Was there sort of a charade around?
Actively acknowledge that with my father.
Yeah, it was acknowledged. You're kind of breaking up, Lorraine. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's really, really generally important. So let me say a few things here, Lorraine. And if I say anything that doesn't quite fit your situation, forgive me. But I'm just going to speak in sort of generalities. So there's a great book called The Death of Ivan Illich, and I can't remember the author's name right now. But anyway, it's about sometimes the pain. Some of us, I think for many of us, maybe all of us, at some point, we just want to be seen. The phrase bearing witness, and to be seen for all that we are, even if we're falling apart, even if we're dying or whatever it is, just to be seen in truth. That's a very powerful feeling. To be seen and not judged is powerful. And sometimes when we're trying to protect the dying person or the sick person, we may watch what we say, or hush tones, or speak in half-truths. That can end up hurting the person who's actually doing the dying, because they know something's up. Most people I've ever worked with, in their gut, even if they've never been told their diagnosis, somewhere inside of them knows that they're dying. Very often. Leo Tolstoy, thank you, Monica. I see the comment on the bottom. Yes, it's a Tolstoy book, The Death of Ivan Illich. But back to Lorraine's question, or the point here is, it can be a powerful source of despair when there's a truth, you're sitting in some truth, and the people you love around you are ignoring that truth, like you're not sharing reality. And that can feel it's its own sense of tension and its own sense of pain. So for the most part, most of us, we're doing each other an honor and a service by acknowledging the full reality that we're dealing with. Now, that can be hard to do. There are ways to do that. But I also need a caveat here, Lorraine, and for everybody else, there are cultural and personal overlays here. So in some cultures, the person who is doing the dying, they're not told that they're dying, and for ceremonial reasons and symbolic reasons. And that is the cultural tradition. And that may be, so in other words, that sort of, that blindness may be desired, may be culturally appropriate. So that's something to acknowledge here. There is no right or wrong way. So when I meet families that are suggesting, don't tell mom or dad that he or she is dying, you know, the way to handle that as an American physician with our ethos around autonomy is to say, okay, well, I'm not going to foist that diagnosis on your loved one, on your mom or your dad, but I am going to ask them what they want to know. So if I say, hey, Mrs. Jones, you know, this is complicated, what's going on with you right now. Do you want me, would it be helpful for me to try to talk to you about all that's happening with your life and your body right now? Or would you just as soon I talked with your family? And I've given the patient the power to tell me what they need. So if they say, no, doc, I want to know everything, then it's my job to bring the family together and broker a conversation around the truth. But very
Is it
often,
your
if they don't,
experience that they usually want to know, the
um,
patient?
most often, my experience is most often is they know. And most often they want the family and people around them to share in that reality, so they're not propping up some charade.
Right, right.
But it's not always the case. It is
Yeah,
usually the case.
yeah.
So sorry I rambled a little bit, but Lorraine, I hope that
No,
responded to your point a little bit.
yeah, that was great. And you made me think of something, the newish movie with Tom
Farewell?
Hanks.
Oh, no, what was
Yeah,
that?
the Tom Hanks, The Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, about Mr. Rogers.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know if you've seen it, but there's a scene
Yeah.
where one of the it's so good, where one of the people are dying, and Mr. Rogers, the Tom Hanks character, goes over and whispers to him, and there's like a nodding and acknowledgement, and then the dying man's son says, "What did you say to him?" And Mr. Rogers says, "I asked him to pray for me, because no one is closer to God than a man going through that." And it was just this moment where he acknowledged this man is dying, and he, it's just, and it made you feel like, oh my gosh, no one does that. No
There's
one
a
does that, but it was,
respect.
yes,
Yeah.
a respect. Like, we see you and what you're going through, and we're here for, yeah, you're right.
We're
You're right.
not running
Okay.
away. We're not pretending it's something else. We're
Yeah.
sticking, even though we don't understand it. That is so much honor and respect and love in that. It's hard, but it's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Ashley, I'm going to try and unmute you one more time. And if not, maybe you could type your question. Yeah. For some reason. Oh, wait, there we go.
Yay. Okay.
Sweet.
So you kind of answered my first part of my question already. So I'm an only child. Growing up, death was not something we talked about at all. My parents were older, and then my dad suddenly passed away 6 years ago. My mom lost her mind, and I was the one that handled everything. They had nothing set up. They had no wills, anything like that. So now every time I try and talk to my mom about it, like, hey, let's not do this again, when something happens to you, ultimately, she gets really closed off, doesn't want to talk about it. I've tried being pushy. I've tried just kind of dropping it into conversations. It never works. So, I mean, part of it was about how do you handle something like that? And then on the other side, I have two small children that are 2 and 4, and I don't want them to be in the same position down the road. And I feel like at 2 and 4, obviously it's not a conversation you sit down and have with them, but how do you suggest making it so that conversation is easier down the road, if that makes sense?
With the kids or with your mom, or both?
Yes.
Well, okay, so let's see. So mom, hard to know. Obviously, I don't know your mom, and there could be so many things going on here. It may be that some folks accept it, that it's almost like a tradition, that the way we families show our love to each other is by wading into a hard, confused place. And it maybe I'm not suggesting this is a situation with your mom, but sometimes it's sort of like that pattern plays itself out. The dying person is not talking about it. The family has to do a lot of gymnastics around that person to try to figure that out. And then for some families, that is a sort of a version of love that is passed on, that is the tradition in a way. And family members can show their love by just wading into the confusion and being lost together. I'm not saying that that's what she's doing or that's a great idea, but I get the feeling sometimes that is almost what feels like an unthinking position oftentimes is a thinking position. And that's one point. Another point is, your mom very often people take a little bite at a time with this. They don't go right to an accepting place. Your efforts to try to talk with her about it probably are landing somewhere. And over time, they may have their impact. It may be the 100th time that you say, hey, Mom, have you thought about X, Y, or Z? And one day she might just say, all of a sudden have an answer waiting for you. Then you might just be completely shocked. Why on the 100th time that I asked, did you finally answer the question? Sometimes you just need to chip away. So I would just continue to bring it up in this loving, thoughtful way. And also for your own sense of sanity, that you don't overly personalize her response. So she may not be able to go there just yet. And it doesn't have anything to do with her not hearing you or not loving you, etc. So offering it up, Mom, I'd love to talk about this if you're ready. If not, we'll keep on going. Someday she might be ready. Maybe. Then another point here is very often communication is indirect. So she may not sit down and say, honey, here's what's important to me, X, Y, and Z. When it's my time, I want you to do blah, blah, blah. She may not be that directive, but maybe she'll lob in, maybe you can talk to her about what she loves about life. And if we talk about what you love about life, Mom, that's an indirect way of saying what they're afraid to lose, or what they're sad, what the sadness that will be in the counterpoint. So if she says, gosh, I just love being with family, I just love being at home, that's a little bit of advanced directive. So that means that when it comes time, maybe she wants to be at home. Maybe that means hospice, not the ICU and things like that. So sometimes you can have an indirect version of this conversation through talking about what she loves. That gives you a sense of how to make decisions on her behalf going forward, because you'll know what's important to her. So those are some generic kind of thoughts. And then lastly, the kids, and it may be sometimes of a certain generation, older folks I've seen who are just they're never going to talk about their own wishes. They see it as self-absorbed. It's almost like they see that as selfish. But the second you say, hey, Mom, you'll be doing the grandkids such a favor if you let us know what's important to you, or whatever it is, if you make it clear to Mom that she's doing you and your grandkids and your kids a favor, then all of a sudden things can change. Sometimes people won't do it for themselves, but if they know preparing for their end is a kindness to the family, they'll do it in a hot second. So those are some generic thoughts. Then sorry for the kids. Kids are amazing. They're so resilient as a rule. Death is not so foreign to kids as I think we imagine. So very often with kids, it depends where they are in their developmental arc, but as a rule, you follow their lead. If they're asking questions and showing curiosity, then you go with it. If you're trying to take them into a hospital to someone's bedside and they're actively repulsed and not wanting to go, then, don't force them. But you can usually read kids in real time and follow their lead. They'll tell you what they're ready for. And I would say in general, we underestimate kids' ability to deal with death.
Yeah, I'll add to that too. My grandfather passed away last year, and my son, who's 12, we were at the viewing, and he said, I really want to Papu was my grandfather. He's like, I really want to touch him. And I was like, well, let's go touch him. And despite my great growth and death and being better with it, I'm still not real cool on touching the dead. But I thought, well, my son's okay with this, and he wants to go touch Papu. So, and it's so interesting how when you're with a child, you grow. I mean, you just grow. And so we went and we held Papu's hand, and he said he feels like our lizard. And I said, yes, he sort of does. And it was this, this moment, but taking a child's lead is a really easy way to kind of grow yourself, I noticed too. Beth, I'm going to unmute you. Okay, you're good.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you. I'm looking at the read back here. Yes, we do suck at death and dying in the United States for sure. But I have to say that this conversation has given me great comfort. And I did listen to your TED Talk prior to the call this morning. My mom passed in November. So thank you. You've given me comfort that I gave her a beautiful death. So sorry for the moment.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. It's so beautiful to hear that.
Yeah.
Oh.
Beth, you're such a dear. She is such a dear person, Beth. Oh, I'm just like, we're all gonna cry, but I'm so sad.
No, but she was she had Alzheimer's, and she suffered a fall last May, and it was kind of a slippery slope. And it was interesting when you were talking to the other participants about communication, and she gave us a lot of signals. And it was, the other thing that I found interesting about this is I felt like I was the person that didn't want my mom to know that she was dying, and my sister was a little more forthright in that communication with her. And so my mom was a runner, and towards the end, I said to her, I said, Mom, this is your final finish line, and we will be there with you if you want us to be, and if you don't, we will honor that too. And she waited, there was a period of time where she was with a hospice volunteer. My sister and I had some things to do, and we came back, and I was holding her hand, my sister was at her head, my niece was in the room, the hospice volunteer was there, her favorite nurse was there, and we had some really lovely music going, and she, sprinted across that finish line with a whole bunch of love around her. And I really loved in your TED Talk in your hospice that you sprinkle flowers. I thought that was really beautiful. After she passed, we opened the window to kind of let her spirit go. So I just want to say thank you. This is a really sticky topic for a lot of people, and I really look forward to reading your book. So thank you for taking the time today.
Oh, Beth, thank you for sharing that story. That is so beautiful. And
you make me cry again.
Oh, no, hey, tears are totally welcome. I mean, God, I love tears. They're so powerful and useful. I mean, so let them fly, and what a way to honor your mama. It's just so beautiful. I mean, so thank you so much for sharing it. And thanks for making the point that beauty is not opposed to pain, that tears are not opposed to joy. They go together, and thanks for living that for us. It's just gorgeous. Thank you. What a lucky woman she was.
Yeah, Beth, you're so sweet. Okay, Tanya, you are unmuted.
Hey everyone.
Hi.
I just wanted to really say thank you. I really appreciate that we're talking about this more. When how teenagers think they're so invincible. Well, when I started college at the age of 17, there was a school shooting, and that was the first sort of that was the first time that even though I had seen grandparents pass away, it was the first time I realized I could die, and that was a huge game changer. And ever since, I've always made it very clear, sorry, I totally lost my train of thought.
I do it all the time.
It's okay. That's part of life too, is losing our train of thought.
But yeah, I've always let my family and friends know that I wish to be an organ donor, that I would prefer to die at home, that I don't want extensive last resort sort of measures taken if my quality of life would be greatly impacted. It just made me realize that even though that was a very spontaneous event, that death is a thing and it's part of life. And I do want my friends and family to know my wishes at the end. And this isn't something we talk about a lot. And so I'm very grateful to be here. And thank you so much for bringing more awareness to this.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you. And you make the point here. I wish you and I had both had really hard reasons to make death real in our own lives, right? We had something that happened that was really, regrettable in so many ways. But I don't know that I would have, as a young person, I don't know that I would have dared to wrap my head around death as soon as I did without that experience. And I don't know about you, Tanya. It's hard to wish for a school shooting in the backdrop, but it's it's hard to escape that. Especially for us young folks, you need an excuse to kind of really wake up to this. I mean, yeah, we know we all die. Sure. Yeah. It's this abstraction in the back, but to really internalize it. Yeah. Someday. Yeah. But to really internalize it and to feel it in our bones is a very powerful force. In some way, I don't know what to do with this wish, because it ends up feeling a little sadistic. But especially when I work with young students who are going to the health professions, I actively want them to have an experience like you had, Tanya, or like I had, to make the abstract a little bit more real, because it's such a poignant place to get to. It's a hard to get to, but once you're there, it's so life affirming and so sweet and so beautiful and such a connecting force. So I wish the world had, at a young age, had something go wrong to make them wake up in this way, but not wrong enough to hurt you. You know, it's a hard wish for, but I'm just grateful that you and I both had these experiences, and thanks for sharing.
Definitely. Thank you.
All right. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. I think we probably have time for one more quick one. I'm not sure of your name. It's HP Notebooks iPad. You are unmuted.
That's me. I'm Lori Larson, and
Hi, Lori.
The comment that I wanted to make was that I've had a lot of experience with death. I've lost 2 children and a nephew, and my mother and my father, of course. But I was quite young when that happened. But you know, I just wish people would be a little bit more forward about it. And you know, you don't pass. There's no rainbow bridge. You die, and you know, it's actually, you know, the fact that people can't talk about it actually makes it harder, because you can't, you know, they don't know what to say, so they say the wrong thing, and they're trying, you know, I get that. But people don't talk about it enough to know how to talk about it in a comforting, helpful way. And I find that's kind of frustrating. And you know, I also feel like one of the things that you said, this is just one quick little comment. I think that as a doctor, you, or doctors in general, they owe the patient the honesty to help them deal with their death, and not necessarily to defer to their family's wishes. Because if their family doesn't want them to know about it, that's too bad. That's their illness and their body. And you know, there's so much denial out there. I mean, so many people are so uncomfortable with this. They don't want to help mom and dad die. They don't want to deal with mom and dad dying. So they just say, well, we'll just not talk about it. And a person, like you said, a person knows exactly what's going on with their body usually. And I hope that, I mean, I'm so glad about this conversation, because it's just one conversation, but it's one that we need to have. And I hope people can all take it to their other conversations that they have in their life, and help others understand that it's something that you can just talk about. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, Lord, thank you. No, it's so beautiful. Thank you. I mean, it's a perfect sort of summary comment, I think, to our conversation. And look, we are having this conversation. They are happening. And denial is a very real thing out there. It's a powerful thing too, but there are also some counterpoints. Meredith, you hosting this conversation, you all participating in it. And you're right, Lori, we can all go out in the world and do a little differently and be part of this change. And I think the basic change that you're pointing to, and we're all pointing to one way or another, this is part of life. This is not the antithesis of life. This is not against life. This is life. And so therefore, let's deal with it together, and let's not make it harder than it needs to be. Then I think, you know, this is how we're going to do it. Yeah, this is a culture change. We as patients, as the public, pushing this conversation and pushing our doctors to do a little differently. And medical education needs to shift itself too, to be prepared to have these conversations. So we're not kicking the can down the road. So anyway, Lori, amen. I'm with you all the way. And I think this very conversation is a counterpoint to the denial that we're all aware of too. It's happening.
Yeah. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. Thank you so very much. Everyone, Dr. Miller's book is A Beginner's Guide to the End. It is fantastic. I've read it. It's wonderful. A way we can continue this conversation is once I post up this podcast and the YouTube video, share it. This is how we get conversations going. I mean, there's a reason Dr. Miller's TED Talk has 10 million views. Like, this is how things get talked about and seen. So thank you all for being here. And Dr. Miller, thank you for your work and everything you do.
Pleasure. Thank you, guys. Such a pleasure meeting you all. Thank you very much.
Take care.